Right, so Mydex is a community interest company. Just a quick headline, that means we're asset locked, can't be bought by Google, we're British, privately funded, and we have to reinvest 65% of any of our profits in our social purpose. Our social purpose is empowering human beings. So when I'm talking today, could you think of it in two specific contexts? You as a human being and your life online, and also in your eminent professional capacity, worrying about security and complexity and standards and movement of things all around. In order to play in this place, as everybody's alluded to, it's a federated world. We belong to T-Scheme. I'm a board member of T-Scheme. That's one of the contact precedents. We're on G-Cloud. We're a member of the Open Data Institute. We're a member of the Social Enterprise Personal Data Ecosystem, the My Data Innovation Lab, and we are critically an ISO 27001 certified company end-to-end. And that was a very important step for us because we're in the business of empowering individuals. We call them members, and context is king, as we've heard today from Lord Errol. These members of ours are employees, they are customers, they are consumers, they are members of an alumni society, they are a donator to a charity, they are people who help out in good works or whatever, but they are fundamentally human beings who have many aspects to their role. I use myself as a case study sometimes. I'm a governor of a primary school, I'm a group scout leader, I'm a chair of another company, I'm the chief executive of Mydex, and I'm the MD of something else. I'm also a father, a husband, a brother, a son, uncle, aunt. All of those things have different identity, responsibilities and capacities, and I need to move data around. It's a bloody nightmare. But there you go. So why did we design Mydex? Well, to try and solve some of those problems. But I'm not really here specifically to talk about Mydex, but I want to talk to you about this fundamental issue about flow of data. Now, anyone has heard of the World Economic Forum? They've been talking about personal data as the new asset class, and they've all talked about it being the new oil, if you read the Economist article. Unfortunately, the ownership model that persists in Europe came up with saying, well, oil must mean it's ours and we own it. Isn't that fantastic? Well, actually, the analogy about the new oil was about what happened when oil was discovered and it started being converted into the economy. It allowed people to travel. It allowed information, services to flow. It gave the population mobility. So the whole analogy around oil was not about the oil baron who owned the oil in the ground, but about what oil enabled. So when we talk about personal data, the new oil, let's think of it as something that helps things flow, a catalyst for change. And when we look at this story about identity, and I think Sandy made a really good point earlier, as almost everybody did, is that where do you start? What's your on-ramp here? Well, if you've got verified data about an individual, which the government as a root ID provider might have, or the bank having carried out anti-money laundering, or KYC, the gentleman over there said lots of people trying to do KYC on 12-year-old kids to buy shopping centres from Arabia, which I thought was quite interesting. That can lead to an assured identity. If you've got an assured identity, you might be able to access a service, and that could be a private sector or a public sector or a third sector service. Once you've accessed that service and you've transacted, you then end up with some kind of evidentiary note that that transaction was completed. Call it a proof of claim. I have a driving license. I have very few points. I'm a frequent flyer. I belong to this club. Or when American Express try to ring you and ask you the 12 security questions so they can tell you about the thing that they wanted to ring you about, you say, oh, I'm not prepared to do it because I don't know who you are. They go, it's ridiculous. You have to ring us back. I said, well, I don't know what it's about, so I'm not going to bother. Write to me. Which they did, and it was absolutely ridiculous. So you then end up with proofs of claim becoming their own right, verified data. You see where I'm going with this? It's okay, where do you start? It's a bit of a catch-22. So one of the fundamental things about identity and that transference of trust from the physical realm, from a context in which somebody lives, is important to help the digital enablement and the movement of data. But we believe that actually this evidence set is not good enough if it comes from one place. So we believe in a blended evidence set. The government believe in a blended evidence set. They're looking at citizen money living. They want a whole profile with a score, gets you to level 2. We're completely on board with that. But where does this evidence come from? It can't just come from a single CRA database that says, we gathered a load of data and we've got a propensity model that says, you are probably you. We think it needs to come from somewhere else. And the reason it needs to come from somewhere else is that we're moving to this API economy. You're hearing government talk about wholesale, but we all know that when we go to places now, we're rather sick of turning up at websites, knocking on the door, filling out multi-factor authentication accreditation in order to download the bank statement I used to get in the post that I could read in 5 minutes. And actually the whole barrier to accessing the information is becoming very hard. So we're seeing explosion in personal applications where the data arrives to you. You get the data. You don't have to do all that silly stuff. Okay, and it might sound blasphemous to describe it as silly stuff, but it's about time and effort. And the fundamental points are, we want trust, we want control, we want protection of our data. I mean, Lord Errol's copied my slides, so that's how I feel. He wants freedom, but he wants participation. He was much funnier than I was. But we also want proof, don't we? But on the same side, we want to save time. Does anybody want to spend a long time getting their bank statement? I don't. Does anybody want to save money? I think everybody does. Do we want to get things done? I think the fundamental thing is about enabling stuff. You hear about private sector and public sector organisations talking about stripping out a cost in transactions, reducing the latency, making it easier, delivering what you want just in time. They want convenience, they want transparency. I don't know why that's wrapped, but they want to know who they shared what with when. They want to be able to decide to stop sharing it. They want some form of control. You've heard about privacy by design. You've heard about this idea that you could revoke your consent, you could be in control, or you could limit what somebody could do with your data. So this whole challenge around moving data around helps with identity, helps with improvement of the economy, helps with economic growth, and ultimately creates value. So we think there's a pressing problem that the industry, the technologists kind of love because you sell lots of kit and processing power and bandwidth. The organisations think it's a really simple way. As Chris Graham said, it's the sweeping it under the carpet, the whole consent issue. You need to present the offer. The Information Commissioner, we happen to think, is right. And it's this crown of thorns scenario. Here's this poor person in the middle of trying to do a transaction. Please tick this box so we can access data held else anywhere. Use your Twitter ID. We'll go and get the data. And it's called the crown of thorns because everybody's grabbing data from all these different data sources. And I'm into getting data from anywhere. But I actually think this becomes unmanageable both at a technology level, at an authentication level, and also in terms of the transparency for the individual. It's really open to abuse and gaming. Has anybody seen the plywood backdoor that's been implemented for the smart meter scheme? It's absolutely terrifying. The smart meter to the data communications companies, PKI, world-class, really, really sophisticated, but any third party that wants your smart meter data, all they need to say is, Louise, you said yes. And the data communication company says, oh, there's a tick in my XML data packet that says Louise said yes. And they give it to you. Now, we did point it out. It's been to the consumer days and they've had a big shock. So this whole issue is individuals are not empowered. Individuals don't know what's going on. And technically, if you're a technologist and a platform designer like me, you know this thing's not going to fly. We believe that the individual needs to be at the center. The individual needs to see the information flowing. They're one of the hubs in this equation. Empowering an individual, we call it a personal data store. There are other providers out there that do different things, which manage the consent layer, manage the authorization and movement of data. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's simpler. Simple things, 45 to 76% drop in transaction costs, dramatic reduction in risk. So we believe that evidence coming from all of these organizations, exactly as Sandy's talked about, and we're closer than we are apart on many of these things, is these people have got data about you. They collected it, they followed AML processes, they got loads of information, and they're in a position to provide a part of the evidence set. That's exactly what's happening around government. So they give you a certificate. Now the problem is, there will be, thank you David. Now the problem is, we all know, anyone here worked on a standards group for less than 5 years and got a result? No, right? So the problem is interoperability, isn't it? Fundamentally, you're going to have multiple standards, multiple trust frameworks. It's like a Venn diagram on steroids. So you need to be able to equip an individual to receive evidence and information, multiple data sets, multiple data standards, and be able to repurpose them and send them out with a new certificate. So our role, as we see it, is enabling the individual to gather all of this evidence from all these different places with whatever certificate format it comes in, rank and grade the certificates, and then be able to reissue stuff out here so that they can share data on a privacy by design basis with the evidence that it's real, because they're not the person asserting. They're using the aggregate evidence there. Trusted digital identity happens. Verified police account. 360 view, that apocryphal thing. I wrote a book on CRM. And I said it was a strategic agenda, and all the technology companies go, no, it's really cool. You get this big database and you find out about your customer. We said, no, it won't happen. It's one question at a time. Data builds up over time. It's really hard to maintain. So here's a couple of use cases. They're all slightly different slides because other people have been putting them together. We've been involved. Here's this poor guy in the middle. He's actually got a trusted identity, goes into DWP and says, can you give me a certificate, a digital token that says I'm on universal credits? Current paper process, £175 per letter, needs it 3 times. Because he wants to go to the energy company and say, can I have the energy company obligation low energy tariff because I'm on benefits? They go, yeah, but we need proof that you're on benefits. If they want a quote from all 3, he has to go and get a letter. It's mad. Blue badge, same thing. I'm disabled. I'm entitled to a blue badge. I need to get it from the central register. I've got to give it to Warwickshire County Council. And then I've got to access behind there 3 or 4 service providers that help me. It's all paper-based. It's a nightmare. Yeah? So fundamentally, moving data attributes around with proof about claim allows you to get stuff done. Here's another really simple example. All I'll say about our approach to IDA is that you could bolt a credit reference agency in here, but we're pulling the data from their personal data store with the certificates, doing the calculation following GPG 4445, calculating a level of 2 assurance, and they go through the hub. Job done. It's just a different way of gathering evidence. This is another one. Anyone heard of the auto-enrollment pension? And the pot follows member and the automatic transfer. Every company above 10,000 employees has to do it right now. It's a fantastic idea because it's equipping the citizen for a long-term pension. At this age, they don't give a monkeys about their pension. That's why they've done it. The problem is there's no identity built in at the moment. Now, we've been invited to participate. We said, you ever heard of IDA? And they go, oh, but it's a private sector scheme we can't possibly influence, but let's have a Chatham House Rules meeting. So these guys are working with their employers. They've got a proposition. We know identity's verified because that person is prepared to say you're entitled to work in the UK, we'll pay you money every month for turning up and doing a job, and we've seen your passport. Sounds like a set of evidence to me. Certificate goes to the pension provider gives it to the personal data store, they get their pay slips come through, and as they build up over time, they start to get choices. But they're accumulating their pension pots. The automatic movement of pensions driving the insurance industry mad, because if you're trying to run a treasury function with billions of pounds in it, and every month, because people happen to have moved from McDonald's to Pret, you've got to suddenly take money out of long-term investment, it's a nightmare. So we're trying to find a way in which the individual becomes a participant. Here's one with the NHS again. Here's the identity program sitting in the middle of the IDPs. They've got this wonderful idea that they'll do GP extraction services to let the drugs companies do research on pseudo-anonymised data. I'm not going there today, right? But the GP systems, the person's entitled to get their own medical record by 2015. How they're going to do that? Identity is an important part of that. But they also want to do really practical things. People want appointments to go and see their doctor or to get a specialist consultation, or they'd like to analyse their own prescription history. It's all just data, but it's a very valuable thing. There's an NHS number, there's open data services. These people want to work. So we're working with the Open Data Institute on things like criminal justice, education, attainment, progression data, and all manner of other things. And there are these opportunities for different parts of public sector and private sector to work together. So at the heart of it, the concluding point, I said we work for you as people. We realised in all the work, 5, 6, 7 years of research about identity, everyone says we've been talking about person-centric identity. We haven't. We've been talking about organisations deciding how you'll log in. Actually, we think we should be talking about how you as an individual get your own ID. The ID is designed so it supports every bloody protocol on the planet. And actually, when you rock up to your university and you go, oh, we have a shibboleth implementation of SAML 2, we go, that's not a problem, I've got a Mydex ID, it supports shibboleth, can I associate it with it? For the period of time I need access and control to the stuff at universities, fine. I then moved to another university to do my PhD thesis, and they go, actually, we've implemented Open Athens, which is a SAML-based protocol with a different specifier. So it's not a problem, my Mydex ID does it. This is private, unlike Twitter, Facebook, Google, where they log every interaction where you use your ID. The only person who has a log of the use of your ID is yourself, because you keep a log in your personal data store. That Mydex ID will support SAML for the government ID. The individual will have that. They will keep a record of all their interactions with government and how many times they access the service. Privacy friendly, because we as the IDP are not allowed to know where they went, because it's private. but we enable that. They have a username and password vault built into their personal data store, which allows them to get the semblance of single sign-on in this multi-federated world. We support Mozilla Persona, so if you want to turn up something, they go, we've adopted the open web standard Mozilla Persona, you go, I'll use my Mydex ID. Next site says you can log in with your open ID, you go, it's fine, it's my Mydex ID. And then you go to a Mydex ID, relying party who's outsourced registration, authentication to Mydex, and they go, I'll use my Mydex ID. Now, do you see where I'm coming from? I'm one guy. I, at the moment, am 53, I've got 565 usernames and passwords. It's really hard, okay? And I adopt a security protocol and premise about passwords and memory things, and Lord Errol, some very good advice. All I'm saying is if we turn it on its head and put it around the person, it gets cheaper for every organisation that wants identity. We're not saying buy open source, we're all completely open source, but you can implement a mission critical enterprise grade security thing, and we're just saying get out of the username and password business and get into the access control layer, which is where it's all about. So, you know, we think the individual's the logical point of integration. We think identity eventually becomes a byproduct of the movement of attributes. This is my last slide, I promise. And a federated identity assurance scheme is vital, absolutely fundamental. Everybody's got a role to play, and that's why I think commend the government for investing in a public-private scheme. And you've got GSMA here today are working on something similar that hopefully will come together. And we think open personal data attribute exchange without all the complexity and the crown of thorns model, we think is a bit of a winner. We built Mydex as a community interest company, so trust could exist, so it couldn't be bought. It's a trust framework, it's registered with OIX, and it's a platform that makes this possible. So we just want the individual to be a participant. End of.